The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual noise of 1,000 different species talking at once. Ambassador Zethkar from the Vorthan Empire stood at the center podium, his blue skin shimmering under the bright lights. As he spoke about new trade routes through the Outer Rim territories, his voice carried across the vast hall where representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their designated sections, some listening, others busy with their own conversations. The council chamber was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid that had been converted into the galaxy's most important political center. Nexus Prime orbited no star, floating in the darkness between systems, neutral ground where even the most hostile species could meet without fear of attack. The walls were made of transparent aluminum, offering a view of the star-filled void. Outside, reminding everyone of how small they were in the grand scheme of the universe. Suddenly, every screen in the chamber lit up with flashing red warnings. The gentle hum of conversation stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. Emergency alarms began wailing, a sound that had not been heard in the council chambers for over 50 years. The last time those alarms had sounded, it was during the Great War between the Krillian hegemony and the Vorthan Empire, a conflict that had lasted 12 years and killed billions across dozens of worlds. Ambassador Zethkar stopped speaking and looked around in confusion. His proposal about trade sanctions suddenly seemed very unimportant. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the same image from every angle, a massive warship dropping out of hyperspace directly above Nexus Prime. The ship was unlike anything in the Council's vast databases of known vessels from across the galaxy. The vessel was enormous, easily twice the size of the largest dreadnought in the Vorthan Imperial fleet. Its hull was a dark metallic color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it look like a hole cut out of space itself. Along its sides, weapon ports glowed with an eerie blue light, and strange energy signatures pulsed across its surface like a heartbeat. The ship's design was sleek and predatory, with sharp angles that suggested it was built for one purpose only: war. Speaker Veltar, the ancient leader of the council, rose from his crystal throne at the head of the chamber. His species, the Etherians, were among the oldest in the galaxy, and their crystalline bodies could live for thousands of years. Veltar himself had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, but even he looked shaken by what he saw on the screens. "What species does this vessel belong to?" he asked in his harmonic voice that resonated through the chamber without need for amplification. The Council's military advisors scrambled through their databases, trying to match the ship's design to any known civilization. After several tense minutes, one of them looked up with surprise on his face. "Speaker Veltar, the energy signature matches human technology, but this vessel is far beyond anything we have on record for their species." A murmur ran through the chamber. The humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 70 years ago. They were considered a minor species, barely worth the attention of the great powers. Their small fleet of exploration vessels and cargo ships posed no threat to anyone, and their diplomatic representatives were usually ignored during important discussions. High above Nexus Prime, Captain John Blake stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the chaos unfold on the planet below through his main view screen. He was a man in his early 50s, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in space. His uniform was different from the dress clothes worn by human diplomats, dark blue with silver insignia that marked him as a combat veteran. "Sir, we are receiving over 200 hail attempts from the surface," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from the communications station. She was young, maybe 25, with short brown hair and the kind of focused intensity that came from months of preparation for this moment. Blake did not turn away from the view screen. "Let them wait," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made his bridge crew stand a little straighter. "They ignored our calls for 3 months when we needed help. Now they can experience what it feels like to be helpless and afraid." The captain's hands were clasped behind his back as he watched the frantic activity on Nexus Prime. Ships were launching from the surface, small diplomatic vessels fleeing to what they hoped was a safe distance. the space around the asteroid, was filling with defensive platforms and patrol ships, but Blake knew they were no match for what he had brought. Commander Lisa Park, his first officer, stepped up beside him. She was a tall woman with black hair pulled back in a tight bun, her dark eyes focused on the tactical display that showed the positions of every ship in the system. The Krillian hegemony has 3 cruisers in orbit on the far side of the asteroid, she reported. They are powering up their weapons, but maintaining distance, Blake nodded. Good, let them remember what fear feels like. Maybe it will help them understand what the families on New Haven felt when their ships appeared in our sky. The mention of New Haven made the bridge fall silent. Every person on the ship had lost someone in the massacre 3 months ago. Blake's own daughter had been teaching at the elementary school that the Krillians had targeted first, using their plasma cannons to turn the building into molten glass with over 300 children inside. His grandson had been in her classroom. Chief Engineer Pete Martinez looked up from his station. Captain, all systems are running at full power. The quantum disruption cannon is charged and ready. We can maintain this position indefinitely. Blake turned to face his crew. These were not the diplomatic corps' representatives that the Council was used to dealing with. These were veterans of the contact wars, the brutal conflicts that had marked humanity's first encounters with hostile alien species. They had seen what happened when civilizations tried to test human resolve, and they had learned to respond with overwhelming force. The Council made a mistake, Blake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. They thought they could ignore the deaths of 50,000 human civilians. They thought they could treat the massacre of children as an internal matter. That did not concern them. They believed that humans would accept their decision and go away quietly like good little junior members of their precious galactic community. He walked to the center of the bridge, where a holographic display showed the positions of every ship and installation in the system. With a gesture, he highlighted the council chamber far below. Today, we teach them that humans do not forget. We do not forgive those who stand by and watch innocents die. And we do not accept injustice just because it is convenient for others to ignore it. Lieutenant Foster's console chimed with another incoming transmission. Sir, Speaker Veltar is requesting immediate communication. He says it is a matter of galactic security. Blake smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Galactic security. 3 months ago, when we begged them for help, it was just a local dispute. Now that we have arrived with the means to demand justice, suddenly it threatens the entire galaxy. He looked out at the stars, thinking of his daughter's last message, sent just hours before the Krillian attack. She had been excited about a new student in her class, a refugee child from a war-torn world who was finally learning to smile again. Now they were both dead, along with 50,000 others, and the beings responsible were protected by council law. Open the channel, Blake ordered. It is time for the Galactic Council to learn what happens when they mistake human patience for human weakness. The main holographic display in the council chamber flickered to life, casting blue light across the faces of hundreds of alien diplomats who had never seen anything like the human warship hanging above their world. Speaker Veltar stood at his crystal podium, his ancient form trembling slightly as he established the communication link with the vessel that had appeared without warning in their most secure system. Captain John Blake materialized in the center of the chamber, his image projected from the bridge of his ship. He was surrounded by his crew, and the aliens in the chamber could see that these humans looked different from the diplomatic representatives they were used to dealing with. These people had hard faces and eyes that promised violence if they did not get what they came for. Blake stood with his hands behind his back, his gray hair neat and his uniform crisp despite the months of travel it had taken to reach Nexus Prime. Behind him, the bridge of his ship hummed with activity as his officers monitored every ship and weapon in the system. The tactical displays showed red dots representing threats, but Blake seemed completely calm despite being outnumbered by thousands to one. I am Captain John Blake of the United Earth Navy, he said without any of the formal greetings that usually began diplomatic communications. I am here to address the Council's negligence regarding the New Haven massacre. Speaker Veltar's crystalline face shifted colors, a sign of stress among his species. He had ruled the council for over 200 years and had never been addressed so directly by a member of a junior species. The protocols demanded respect for the ancient traditions of galactic diplomacy, but this human seemed to care nothing for such customs. Captain Blake, your presence here is highly irregular, Veltar began, his harmonic voice carrying across the chamber. If you have grievances with the Council's decisions, they must be filed through the proper diplomatic channels and reviewed by the appropriate committees. We tried that, interrupted Commander Lisa Park, stepping into view beside her captain. She was tall and imposing, with dark eyes that swept across the assembled aliens like she was counting targets. For 3 months, Ambassador Williams submitted formal complaints, evidence packages, witness testimonies, and requests for justice. Your committees filed them away in their databases and pretended they did not exist. The chamber fell silent, except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the nervous chittering of some species that made noise when they were afraid. Even the diplomatic staff members, who usually whispered constantly during sessions, had stopped their conversations to listen to these humans, who had arrived with the most powerful warship anyone had ever seen. Captain Blake's expression hardened as he looked directly at the section where the Krillian hegemony representatives sat. The Krillian hegemony slaughtered 50,000 innocent men, women, and children on New Haven Colony. They targeted schools first, then hospitals, then residential areas where families were trying to hide. They broadcast the executions across their military networks as entertainment for their soldiers. Ambassador Korath of the hegemony rose from his seat, his insectoid features clicking with what might have been anger or fear. His species communicated partly through sound and partly through chemical signals, but the translation systems in the chamber made his words clear to everyone present. The New Haven incident was a legitimate military action against human expansion into disputed territory, Korath said, his voice buzzing through the translators. The council reviewed all evidence and determined that both sides shared responsibility for the conflict. Blake turned his full attention to the Krillian ambassador, and his smile was not pleasant. Both sides shared responsibility. Tell me, Ambassador, what military threat did 6-year-old children pose to your mighty hegemony? What strategic value was there in using plasma weapons on a playground during recess? The captain gestured to someone off-screen, and Lieutenant Amy Foster stepped forward carrying a datapad. She was young but moved with the confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. Her short brown hair was regulation length, and her uniform bore the insignia of the Communications Corps. We have compiled a list of exactly 847 Krillian military officers and government officials who participated in or authorized the massacre, Foster said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication system. We have their names, their ranks, their current locations, and detailed records of their specific crimes against human civilians. She held up the datapad so the cameras could focus on it. We want these individuals delivered to our ship within 24 hours to face trial for crimes against humanity. The chamber erupted in noise as representatives from dozens of species began talking at once. Some were outraged at the human demands. Others were calculating what this might mean for their own relationships with Earth, and still others were simply trying to understand how a species they had dismissed as unimportant had managed to build a warship that made their own. Fleets look like toys. Speaker Veltar raised his hand for silence, and gradually the noise died down. Captain Blake, what you are requesting is impossible. The Council does not have the authority to extradite citizens of member species for trial by other members. There are established procedures for handling disputes between civilizations. And if we refuse to comply with your demands, added Ambassador Korath, his insectoid features twitching with what the translation systems interpreted as nervous defiance, what exactly do you intend to do about it? Blake looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of beings from hundreds of different worlds. Some were curious, some were afraid, and some were clearly calculating whether they could destroy his ship before he could act. He had expected this reaction, and he had come prepared for it. That is an excellent question, Ambassador, Blake said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that made experienced soldiers nervous. You want to know what humans do when civilized diplomacy fails, and justice is denied. He turned to address the entire chamber, his voice rising slightly so that even the beings in the back rows could hear him clearly. You treated the massacre of our people as a minor inconvenience. You filed our evidence away and hoped we would simply forget about the deaths of 50,000 civilians. You protected the beings who murdered children and called it maintaining galactic stability. Commander Park stepped closer to the communication pickup, her face grim. The Council made a choice 3 months ago. You chose to protect war criminals rather than deliver justice. You chose political convenience over the lives of innocent people. You chose to test whether humans would quietly accept the murder of their families. Blake nodded to his first officer, then looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting his image to every being in the chamber. So, now you get to find out why humans are the only species in the galaxy who developed the concept of mutually assured destruction and actually meant it. The captain gestured to someone off-screen, and the image shifted to show the tactical display from his bridge. Red markers indicated every ship and defensive installation in the Nexus Prime system, while blue markers showed the positions of what appeared to be additional human vessels that no one had detected until now. You have 24 hours to deliver. The war criminals on our list, Blake said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had already decided what would happen next. After that, you will discover that human patience has limits and you have reached them. The communication link closed, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence as hundreds of beings tried to process what they had just witnessed. For the first time in galactic history, a junior species had issued an ultimatum to the council itself, backed by weapons that no one understood and a determination that no one had expected from the quiet humans who had joined their community only decades ago. 24 hours passed with no response from the Galactic Council except for endless emergency sessions and heated debates that accomplished nothing. Captain Blake stood on his bridge watching the chronometer count down the final minutes, his crew silent around him as they prepared to show the galaxy what human technology could accomplish when diplomacy failed. The UES Retribution hung motionless above Nexus Prime, its dark hull absorbing the light from distant stars while energy readings from its weapon systems made every sensor in the system scream warnings. Ships from a dozen different species maintained what they thought was a safe distance, their crews watching nervously as the human vessel made no aggressive moves but radiated the kind of power that made experienced military officers very uncomfortable. Time is up, Captain, reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from her communications station. Her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. No compliance from the Council, no movement from the Krillian representatives, and no sign that anyone is taking our demands seriously. Blake nodded and walked to the center of his bridge where a holographic display showed every celestial body in the Nexus Prime system. With a gesture, he highlighted a small moon that orbited the fifth planet, a dead rock with no atmosphere and no life, perfect for what he had in mind. Target the uninhabited moon designated Nexus 5 Alpha, he ordered, his voice carrying to every station on the bridge. Full power to the quantum disruption cannon. Let the galaxy see what happens when they mistake human warnings for empty threats. Chief Engineer Pete Martinez looked up from his console where streams of data showed the incredible energies building within the ship's most advanced weapon system. Quantum disruption cannon charging, Captain. Power levels are climbing past anything we achieved during testing. Estimated time to full charge is 90 seconds. The weapon that Blake's ship carried was beyond anything in the galactic databases. Human scientists had discovered how to manipulate the fundamental forces that held matter together, creating a beam that did not simply destroy targets but remove them from existence entirely. The technology was so advanced that even Earth's own physicists did not fully understand how it worked. Commander Lisa Park monitored the tactical display as ships throughout the system began moving to what their commanders hoped were safer positions. Multiple vessels are backing away from our target zone, The Krillian cruisers have moved behind the asteroid, and the Vorthan diplomatic escort is requesting permission to leave the system entirely. Blake allowed himself a small smile. Fear is a useful emotion when it leads to wisdom. Unfortunately, the Council seems determined to learn this lesson the hard way. On Nexus Prime, emergency sessions of the Galactic Council had been running continuously since Blake's ultimatum expired. Speaker Veltar stood before the assembled representatives, his crystalline form dim with stress as he tried to maintain order among beings who were finally beginning to understand that the humans were not bluffing. "The human vessel is powering up some kind of weapon system," announced the Council's military advisor, a nervous being from the Centauran Federation whose species had fought humanity during the contact wars and learned to respect their military capabilities. "Energy readings are off our scales, and our analysts have no idea what kind of damage it might cause." Ambassador Korath of the Krillian hegemony rose from his seat, his insectoid features clicking with agitation. "One ship cannot threaten the entire Galactic Council. Our combined fleets number in the tens of thousands. Surely we can deal with a single human vessel, no matter how advanced their technology might be." "The Krillians are welcome to test that theory," came a new voice from the human delegation section. Ambassador Williams had been quietly observing the panic around him, but now he stood to address the chamber with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what his military was capable of accomplishing. Williams was an older man with white hair and the kind of diplomatic bearing that came from decades of representing humanity in hostile environments. But, unlike the usual diplomatic representatives, he wore a small pin on his lapel that marked him as a retired admiral of the Earth fleet, and his eyes held the same hard certainty as Captain Blake's. "Captain Blake's ship represents the latest advancement in human military technology," Williams said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication system. "What you are about to witness is not an act of aggression but a demonstration of what we could have done to the Krillian hegemony 3 months ago if we had chosen revenge over justice." Back on the Retribution, the quantum disruption cannon reached full charge with a deep humming sound that resonated through the ship's hull. The weapon's targeting system locked onto the small moon, calculating the exact quantum frequencies needed to disrupt the atomic bonds that held the celestial body together. "All systems ready, Captain," reported Lieutenant Danny Stone from the weapons console. He was young but had trained for months to operate the most advanced weapon system humanity had ever built. Quantum disruption cannon at full power and locked. On target. Blake looked around his bridge at the men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not return home. They had all lost someone in the New Haven massacre, and they had all volunteered to deliver humanity's response to those who thought human lives were expendable. "The Council had 3 months to deliver justice," Blake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. "They chose to protect war criminals instead of innocent victims. They chose political convenience over moral responsibility. They chose to test whether humans would quietly accept the murder of our families." He turned to face the main view screen where the targeted moon hung in space, a small gray sphere that was about to become the first demonstration of human resolve in the new galactic order. "Fire!" Blake ordered. The quantum disruption cannon fired with a sound like reality tearing apart. The beam that emerged from the Retribution was not visible to normal sensors, but every instrument in the system detected the massive energy discharge that crossed the distance to the target moon in less than a second. The moon did not explode. It did not shatter into pieces or burn up in a dramatic fireball. It simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, a solid celestial body that had orbited its planet for millions of years, and the next moment there was only empty space where it had been. Even the gravitational effects of its presence faded away as if it had never existed at all. Throughout the Nexus Prime system, the crews of hundreds of ships stared at their sensors in disbelief. The moon had not been destroyed in any conventional sense. According to every instrument they had, it had simply been removed from reality itself, leaving no debris, no energy signature, and no trace that it had ever been there. "Target eliminated," reported Lieutenant Stone, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. Quantum disruption cannon cycling down to standby power. Estimated time to next firing capability is 6 minutes. Blake nodded and opened a communication channel to the council chamber below. Speaker Veltar, you have just witnessed a demonstration of human military capability. That moon contained approximately 4 billion tons of rock and metal. It no longer exists. We can repeat this demonstration every 6 minutes for as long as necessary. The council chamber was completely silent. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy stared at their displays showing empty space where a moon had been moments before. The implications of what they had just witnessed were staggering, not just for the immediate situation, but for the entire balance of power in the galaxy. You now have a choice, Blake continued, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who held the power to reshape the political structure of the galaxy. You can deliver the war criminals responsible for the New Haven massacre, or you can watch as we systematically demonstrate why humanity earned its reputation during the contact wars. He paused to let his words sink in before delivering his final ultimatum. Every 6 minutes that passes without those criminals in my custody, another celestial body in this system will cease to exist. Choose wisely. 6 minutes passed, and still no response came from the Galactic Council. Captain Blake stood on his bridge, watching the chronometer count down while his crew prepared to target the second moon in the system. The political structure that had governed the galaxy for over 1,000 years was beginning to crack under the pressure of humanity's ultimatum, but the beings who had ignored human suffering for 3 months seemed unable to grasp that their time for comfortable deliberation had ended. The second moon vanished from existence with the same terrifying efficiency as the first. One moment it hung in space, a rocky satellite that had existed for millions of years, and the next moment there was only empty void where 4 billion tons of matter had been. Throughout the Nexus Prime system, crews on hundreds of ships watched their sensors confirm what their eyes could barely believe: that humans possessed technology capable of erasing celestial bodies from reality itself. Commander Lisa Park monitored the communication channels as panic spread through the fleets of various species that had gathered to witness what they thought would be humanity's humiliation. Captain, we are receiving urgent transmissions from ships throughout the system. The Vorthan Empire delegation is requesting immediate departure clearance, and 3 different species are asking for emergency diplomatic immunity. Blake nodded, as he studied the tactical display showing ship movements across the system. Fear makes people honest about their priorities. Notice how the species that supported the Krillians 3 months ago are suddenly discovering urgent business elsewhere. Lieutenant Amy Foster looked up from her communications console, where dozens of incoming messages competed for attention. Sir, we are receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Roy Baker at Earthfleet Command. He is requesting a status report on our mission progress. Put him through, Blake ordered, and the main view screen shifted to show the familiar face of the man who had authorized this demonstration of human resolve. Admiral Baker was in his 60s with gray hair and the weathered features of someone who had spent decades commanding ships in hostile space. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed the organized chaos of a fleet preparing for the possibility of total war. Captain Blake, this is Admiral Baker, came the voice from across the galaxy. I am watching the sensor readings from our deep space monitoring stations, and I have to say the quantum disruption cannon is performing exactly as our scientists predicted. What is the current status of your negotiations with the Council? Blake allowed himself a small smile at the Admiral's dry tone. Mission proceeding according to plan, Admiral. The Council is beginning to understand that humanity does not make empty threats. We have removed 2 moons from existence, and I estimate they will require the elimination of perhaps 3 more celestial bodies before they accept that their options have changed. Understood, Captain, Baker replied. However, I need to inform you of some developments here in human space that may affect your mission parameters. The Admiral's expression grew serious as he consulted a datapad held by an aide outside the camera's view. Our intelligence networks are reporting massive ship movements throughout Krillian space. It appears the hegemony is mobilizing their entire fleet for what looks like a full-scale assault on human colonies. Ensign Matt Collins looked up from his sensor station where streams of data showed ship movements throughout the galaxy. "Sir, I am detecting long-range sensor contacts moving toward human space. The computer estimates 18 battle groups with heavy cruiser escorts, all moving at maximum hyperspace velocity." Commander Park studied the tactical information flowing across her displays. "Captain, those fleet movements suggest the Krillians are not planning to surrender their war criminals. They appear to be choosing total war over justice." Blake's expression hardened as he processed this information. The Krillian hegemony controlled over 40 star systems and possessed one of the largest military fleets in the galaxy. If they were mobilizing for war against humanity, it meant they were gambling that they could destroy human civilization before the quantum disruption technology could be deployed against their homeworlds. "Admiral, what is the current defensive posture of our colony worlds?" Blake asked, already knowing the answer would not be encouraging. Humanity's expansion into space had focused on exploration and peaceful settlement rather than military fortification, leaving most human colonies protected by only small patrol fleets. "We are implementing emergency protocols and recalling all available ships to defend our core systems," Baker replied. "However, our intelligence estimates suggest the Krillians have a significant numerical advantage. If they are planning to finish what they started at New Haven, our colonies are going to need every advantage we can give them." Dr. Karen Lewis, the ship's science officer, looked up from her analysis station where she had been monitoring the energy signatures from Krillian space. "Captain, I am detecting some unusual readings from the approaching fleet. The energy patterns do not match standard Krillian weapons technology." "What kind of energy patterns?" Blake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Biological signatures, Captain," Lewis replied, her voice grim. "The readings suggest they have developed weapons specifically designed to target organic compounds. Based on the energy frequencies, I would estimate they are carrying viral or bacterial weapons." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Everyone present understood the implications of biological weapons designed to target human physiology. The Krillians were not planning another conventional attack like the one that had destroyed New Haven. They were planning to exterminate humanity entirely. Ambassador Williams appeared on a secondary communication channel, his diplomatic quarters visible behind him as he addressed both Captain Blake and Admiral Baker simultaneously. "Gentlemen, I have been monitoring Krillian communications through our intelligence networks. I can confirm that the hegemony has developed viral weapons specifically engineered to target human DNA sequences." The ambassador's face was grim as he continued his report. "Their plan is to deploy these weapons against every human colony simultaneously, creating a plague that will spread through our entire species within months. They are calling it the final solution to what they term the human problem." Blake stared at the tactical display showing the approaching Krillian fleet. 18 battle groups represented thousands of ships carrying weapons designed to commit genocide against every human in the galaxy. The beings responsible for the New Haven massacre had decided that rather than face justice for killing 50,000 people, they would attempt to kill every member of humanity's species. "Admiral Baker," Blake said, his voice carrying the cold certainty of someone who had just made a decision that would reshape galactic history, "I am requesting authorization to modify our mission parameters. The Krillian hegemony has chosen extinction over justice." "What are you proposing, Captain?" Baker asked. Though his tone suggested he already knew what Blake had in mind, Blake turned to face the main view screen, where the image of his commanding officer waited for his response. "If the Krillians want to commit genocide against humanity, they can watch their homeworld cease to exist first. I am requesting permission to target Krillian Prime with the quantum disruption cannon." The communication channel was silent for several long moments as Admiral Baker considered the implications of what Blake was suggesting. Targeting an inhabited world would cross a line that no species in galactic history had ever crossed, but the alternative was allowing the Krillians to exterminate humanity entirely. Captain Blake, Baker finally said, you are authorized to take whatever action you deem necessary to protect human colonies from biological weapons attack. The survival of our species takes priority over all other considerations. Blake nodded and turned to address his bridge crew. Set course for Krillian Prime, maximum hyperspace velocity? If they want to play extinction games with humanity, they are about to learn why that was the worst mistake in their species' history. Lieutenant Stone looked up from his weapons console. Sir, are we really going to target an inhabited world? No, Lieutenant, Blake replied, his voice carrying the cold precision of someone who had studied his enemy's weaknesses for months. We are going to surgically remove every military installation, weapons factory, and government building on Krillian Prime while leaving civilian areas completely untouched. We are going to show the galaxy that humans can end any civilization with unprecedented precision, but we choose restraint even when facing extinction. The UES Retribution turned away from Nexus Prime and jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's response toward the heart of the Krillian hegemony. The UES Retribution dropped out of hyperspace above Krillian Prime with the same terrifying precision that had shocked the Galactic Council at Nexus Prime. The homeworld of the Krillian hegemony stretched below them, a planet of red deserts and gleaming cities that housed over 8 billion beings who had no idea their government had chosen genocide over justice. Captain Blake stood on his bridge studying the tactical display that showed every military installation, weapons factory, and government complex on the planet's surface. His science officer, Dr. Karen Lewis, had spent the entire hyperspace journey creating detailed targeting solutions that would eliminate the hegemony's ability to wage war while leaving civilian populations completely unharmed. Civilian evacuation. Status? Blake asked as he watched the organized chaos of a planet trying to respond to the sudden appearance of the most advanced warship in the galaxy. Commander Lisa Park monitored the communications channels where panicked voices in dozens of languages reported the movements of millions of people fleeing areas near military targets. All major population centers adjacent to military installations have been cleared, Captain. The planetary government is cooperating with civilian evacuations, though I suspect they still believe their orbital defenses can protect them, Blake nodded as he watched the pathetic attempts of Krillian defense platforms to lock onto his ship with weapons designed for conventional warfare. The quantum disruption technology that powered his vessel operated on principles that made traditional shields and armor completely useless, turning the most advanced military installations in Krillian space into expensive targets, Lieutenant. Amy Foster looked up from her communications station where emergency broadcasts from across the planet painted a picture of a civilization finally understanding the consequences of their actions. Sir, we are receiving surrender offers from 3 different planetary governors, 12 military commanders, and what appears to be a civilian uprising in the capital city, where people are demanding the government hand over the war criminals responsible for New Haven. Too late for negotiations, Blake replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty of someone who had watched his daughter's school burn while politicians debated appropriate responses. They had 3 months to deliver justice through civilized means. They chose to plan genocide instead. The first quantum disruption beam lanced down from the Retribution to strike the primary military command center in the planet's capital city. The massive complex that had coordinated the massacre of 50,000 human civilians simply ceased to exist, leaving a perfectly circular void in the ground, where nothing remained to show that buildings had ever stood there. Chief Engineer Pete Martinez monitored the weapon systems as beam after beam eliminated military targets with surgical precision. All systems operating within normal parameters, Captain. We can maintain this rate of fire indefinitely without overtaxing the quantum generators. Blake walked to the center of his bridge where a holographic display showed the systematic elimination of every installation that had contributed to the hegemony's ability to wage war. Weapons factories vanished, military academies ceased to exist, and government buildings disappeared as if they had never been built. But the hospitals, schools, and residential areas remained completely untouched. Dr. Lewis coordinated the targeting solutions from her science station, ensuring that each beam struck only military and government targets while avoiding any damage to civilian infrastructure. Captain, we have eliminated 60% of their military production capacity and all of their primary command structures. The remaining targets are mostly secondary installations and regional command posts. The systematic destruction of Krillian Prime sent shockwaves through the galaxy that reached far beyond the military implications of humanity's demonstration. For the first time in galactic history, a species had proven it could end any civilization with unprecedented precision while choosing to show mercy to innocent populations. Commander Park received reports from human intelligence networks throughout the galaxy as news of the attack spread. Captain, we are receiving confirmation that Krillian battle groups throughout their territory are standing down. The fleet that was approaching human space has reversed course and is returning to defend their remaining installations. Blake allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the planet below where emergency services worked to evacuate areas near the remaining military targets. The Krillians had learned in a single day what it felt like to be helpless while a superior force decided their fate, but unlike the massacre at New Haven, Blake had chosen precision over vengeance. "Sir," reported Ensign Matt Collins from his sensor station, "I am detecting massive power fluctuations from the remaining government complexes on the surface. It appears the planetary leadership is attempting to contact us directly." The main view screen shifted to show a group of Krillian officials standing in what appeared to be an emergency command bunker deep beneath their capital city. The lead figure was clearly a high-ranking government minister, his insectoid features twitching with the kind of fear that came from watching one's entire military infrastructure disappear in a matter of hours. "Human captain," the official said, his voice distorted by the translation systems but clearly conveying desperation. "We surrender unconditionally. We will provide the war criminals you requested and cease all military operations against human space immediately." Blake studied the terrified beings on his screen, remembering the arrogant dismissal they had shown when humanity had begged for justice 3 months earlier. "Your surrender is noted but meaningless. You had the opportunity to avoid this demonstration. When we requested the peaceful extradition of war criminals, you chose to plan genocide instead?" Lieutenant Stone looked up from his weapons console where targeting solutions for the remaining military installations waited for execution. "Captain, should we continue the elimination of remaining targets?" "Complete the mission, Lieutenant," Blake ordered. Every installation that contributed to the New Haven massacre and every facility involved in developing biological weapons against human populations will cease to exist. The Krillian hegemony's ability to wage war ends today. The remaining military targets vanished one by one until nothing remained of the hegemony's vast war machine, except empty spaces where buildings had once stood. Weapons factories, research laboratories, military academies, and command centers all disappeared into quantum oblivion while civilian areas remained completely unharmed when the last target had been eliminated. Blake opened a communication channel to the surviving Krillian leadership. "The 847 war criminals on our list will be transported to our ship within 6 hours, or we will begin targeting the military installations of your allied species. This offer will not be repeated." The response came within minutes as transport ships launched from the planet's surface carrying the officers and officials responsible for the New Haven massacre. Blake watched them dock with his ship where they would face trial for their crimes against humanity. Justice delivered 3 months late, but with interest that had reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. Speaker Veltar's voice reached the retribution from Nexus Prime where the Galactic Council had watched humanity's demonstration with growing understanding of what the future would bring. "Captain Blake, the Council recognizes that the age of human diplomacy has begun. We formally request that humanity assume a permanent leadership position in galactic affairs." Blake smiled as he looked out at the stars that had once seemed so hostile to human expansion. Speaker Veltar, humanity accepts the responsibility of leadership, but understand that we will never again tolerate injustice simply because it is politically convenient. The galaxy has been reminded that mercy is a choice, not a weakness, and that some lines should never be crossed. The UES Retribution turned away from Krillian Prime and began its journey home to Earth, carrying the knowledge that humanity had finally earned the respect of the galaxy, through the demonstration that true power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction served justice and when mercy served a greater purpose.